Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the final session of our panel sessions in Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week. And this session is going to focus on skills in the nuclear sector. My name's Andy Walker, and I'm a construction and infrastructure journalist who writes on many of these issues across our industry. Just before we start, I'd like to thank again our sponsors, Cundall, Epicam, and Vattenfall Heat UK for their support for our event this week. This session is going to be, as I said, looking at empowering the future, skills development for the nuclear power sector. And we had a conversation over the last couple of days around the importance of that particular sector in shaping the future of the net zero landscape. And I think in this session, I know we're going to learn about some of the strategic initiatives that will shape the future of the nuclear sector and ensure its sustainable growth. We've got two knowledgeable speakers to talk about that. We've got Alex Nicholson, who's head of nuclear skills and nuclear supply chain at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, who will talk about the UK's targets for expanding the sector across a number of areas and a lot more besides. We also are joined by Arun Khuttan, who is the co-chair of Next Generation Nuclear Industry Council, who will be offering his views. And his organisation was established as a shadow board to the Nuclear Industry Council in 2020 and comprises a dozen young professionals who represent workers in that particular sector, as well as a nuclear industry association who act as the secretariat for that group. So I'm looking forward to hearing his observations as well. Our first speaker, as I said earlier, is Alex Nicholson, who is the head of nuclear skills and nuclear supply chain at DESNZ, the Department for Engineering, Security and Net Zero. And he is, amongst other things, going to address the pressing workforce gap in the nuclear industry and highlight some of the opportunities for developing the skilled workforce that will be needed going forward. So that's enough from me, and I'm going to hand the floor over to Alex. The floor's yours.
Thank you, Andy, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today to join this session, an incredibly important topic and one that sits really at the heart of what we are trying to do in the nuclear sector. So as Andy set out, I'm Alex Nicholson. I head up our work on nuclear skills and nuclear supply chain in the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. And as part of that work, I support what's called the nuclear sector skills team that is delivering something called the Nuclear Skills Plan. That's what I'm here to talk about today. So nuclear skills, something that both underpins our current nuclear program, but is also integral for delivering our longer term nuclear ambition. And what I want to spend a little bit of time talking about today is both the need to grow the UK's nuclear workforce, but also some of the action that's being taken by both the defence and civil sector working collaboratively to collectively respond to that need. Now, you won't be surprised to hear me say this, but nuclear is integral to both our energy and national security. It is something that supports thousands of highly skilled jobs up and down our country, most of which are outside London and the southeast. And this demand will grow rapidly over the decades to come. And that presents opportunities for us in the UK to provide pathways for more people to build long and rewarding careers here in the nuclear sector. And it's something that must be addressed both urgently but also collectively, with no single part of the sector operating in isolation able to solve these challenges alone. And whilst there are pockets of excellence across the sector, some that I know Aaron will talk about today, work that we're incredibly proud of in the sector. So things like our skills academies, our excellent graduate and bursary schemes. I think what I'm here to kind of go through a bit through this session is about the collective and sustained commitment needed by the sector to operate as a whole so that we can deliver the outcomes needed at the pace required. And so, yeah, throughout today's session, I'll be really keen to talk about the nuclear skills plan. So something where the sector has come together on what is effectively kind of a joint growth, development and EDI program it's something that is operational, being delivered, but also focused on the individuals themselves. And I think that is something that is key. It's not about just how many people do we need to deliver a specific program. It's about how do we provide pathways so individuals have long and rewarding careers, so they can learn, they can develop, and they can grow as they help us to grow our sector programs. So I enjoy talking about that today. I'll pause there. Andy, back to you.
Great, thanks very much for that, Alex. I'm going to go dive straight into our second panelist, who is Arun Khuttan, who is co-chair of the Next Generation Nuclear Industry Council. Arun, over to you.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Alex. Yeah, really grateful to be here. Thanks for having me along. So, yeah, as mentioned, the Next Gen NIC has been around for a few years now as this shadow board to the NIC to really provide that opportunities, building on the skills of the entire sector and so on. We've got a few work streams really looking at civil defence collaboration, parliamentary influence, and also sustainability. But skills plays a huge role in that, and I think the nuclear sector is really poised to address one of the biggest challenges of our time, climate action and climate change. And we can obviously do a lot in that space to get us to net zero, a more integrated and reliable grid, and energy security. But what I wanted to talk a little bit about is how we can really contribute to sustainable development that goes beyond climate change. And actually, through the skills angle, there is a huge opportunity and impact to society more broadly. And a lot of the initiatives that Alex has mentioned there are already beginning to contribute to that. So, for example, obviously working in communities that might not have historically had all of the job opportunities that nuclear has brought, opening up to those communities and helping to address those challenges. And in the kind of sustainability world, I really like to look at where is the maximum impact, and what are those topics that can have the maximum impact both on us as a sector to be able to deliver what we need to, having that opportunity for improved performance and deliverability and lowering costs in construction, but also what's the other side of the coin? Where are those topics that we can have a really big impact on society? Obviously, there's the carbon reduction and low carbon energy, but there's also the skills angle, and that is one topic that is mutually beneficial to the sector to be able to deliver what we need to, but also we can really help contribute to society by including diversity and inclusion in the way we recruit and retain graduates, being inclusive of the workforce, going to communities that we haven't conventionally gone to, making sure that they're included in part of that journey. And that also links into the decent work and economic growth in a lot of communities that we work in, innovation, and those communities that need that investment in skills, and really actually helping on the social side that enables us to be a more connected society, and maybe looking at those challenges, the other big global challenges we have around social inequality and division between societies. So I think there's a huge range of topics that nuclear skills and the nuclear sector can begin to address because of how uniquely we're positioned in different communities and across the country. So that's me, Andy, back to you.
Thanks very much, Arun, for that. I'm going to open this up for questions now. I've got a number of questions that I'd quite like to pose, and if we have any from our audience, then please post them in the questions box, which is indicated by a question mark in a speech bubble in front of you somewhere on your screen. But just going back to Alex there, and you talked about a number of issues, including the National Nuclear Strategic Plan for Skills. Why does the nuclear sector need to grow its workforce?
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. So a couple of things I just want to draw on here and just linking into what Aaron has set out as well. So I think the first thing I'd say is, if we look at the recent energy crisis, if we look at the pressure on household bills, I think that's something that has underlined the importance of ensuring that the UK is more energy independent, it's more secure, it's more resilient. And so one of the government's missions is to make Britain a clean energy superpower, delivering clean power by 2030 and accelerating to net zero. And so priorities within that are, how do we enhance energy security? How do we protect bill payers? how do we create economic growth in the UK and generate more jobs, and how do we reduce the UK's greenhouse emissions? And the nuclear sector sits really at the core of that. It has a long-term role to support that mission, and in doing so, demonstrating its continued vital importance to our energy security, our economic prosperity, and our national security. And generating around kind of 6 gigawatts of power today, it's something that is both reliable and low carbon, but it is something that is also able to provide that resilient power supply to complement our renewables. And in the UK, we have a growing nuclear ambition, and we know therefore that there is a need to grow our skilled workforce. And I should just say, when I talk about the nuclear workforce, what I want to really emphasize is that the sector itself includes all of the organizations that play a role in delivering our defense nuclear deterrent, but also kind of empowering the submarine fleet, but also kind of underpinning our civil nuclear energy program. So that's everything from program activity from concept through to disposal, so including decommissioning, and it covers the workforce in both public and private sector organizations. So if we look at that as a workforce that needs to grow, we know that that will take time. It doesn't happen overnight. But also, if we look at those specialist nuclear skills, they're pretty scarce, and competition for that talent is high. And we also need people with those kind of transferable skills that can come from adjacent sectors. So things like project managers, welders, to everything in between. And again, there's competition both in the UK and internationally for that talent. So our challenge is to grow the sector to meet that demand that we know it's going to need to respond to. And because we have those ambitious targets for growth in the sector, we've got to ensure that we have that workforce kind of growing now. And if I can just draw into some of the specifics, so I think back in 2023 there was a workforce assessment done, and we know that the nuclear workforce stood at around 83,000 across the UK. And to deliver the programs that I've talked about previously, that will need us as a sector to fill an additional 40,000 new roles by 2030. So if we're going to be able to deliver our priorities for national security and energy resilience, we need to fill 40,000 new roles. And as part of that, 35% of the current nuclear workforce is over the age of 50. And so we know that at some point there will be a tipping point where we lose some of the most experienced people in our industry. Again, kind of further really highlighting the urgency to address the skills gap. And so that's where the nuclear skills plan kind of comes into the equation. It's something where, if we look at how do we respond to this need? And if we know that it needs to be collaborative action from civil and defence stakeholders, government, industry, further education, how can we build that into a plan to respond? And so one of the earliest interventions in that plan is about, how do we significantly grow our entry pipeline? How do we double the apprentices? How do we double our graduates by the next academic year? So I can probably go into that a little bit later, but I think what I would kind of finish by saying is, we know the size of our sector, we know where it needs to get to deliver our civil and defence ambition. So we know what the gap is between there. We know that there's a need for the sector to work as one, acting as a whole to respond to that. We have a kind of a clearer picture of what those specific skilled needs are. It's now about getting a plan in place to respond to that collectively. And yeah, look forward to saying a little bit more about that throughout today's session. I'll pause there. Thanks.
Thanks. I'm just going to turn to Arun. I'm actually interested in your group, the Next Generation Nuclear Industry Council, in respect of the fact that obviously it was set up as a shadow board, in fact, of, as I said in the introduction, the Nuclear Industry Association, because I suppose you're looking to attract and get more, get that next generation to advocate for skills and the whole sector as a whole. So, if you can just kind of just explain to us, what was the thinking behind setting that up in the first place, and also to let us know what you think the challenges are in attracting people to this sector, because presumably that's one of the reasons why the council was actually set up in the first place. Arun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question. And I think the NIC at the time, the Nuclear Industry Council, really saw the value in having kind of a shadow board that could bring in fresh ideas and help drive some work streams. And so we were set up, and Georgia Paulson was our previous chair, and Alex Gardner is our previous and current chair, who's been really involved with that and really fantastic to work with. One of the first things we did actually in the first few years of being around was a future workforce report called Stepping into the Future. And this was a really, really great piece of work, because what we did was go out and interview over 100 young people across the sector to identify what they saw as a future successful sector. What do we need to do to really get to that final stage of having a very thriving and inclusive sector? So this whole group of individuals were really representative of the UK kind of demographics and what they really wanted to see. And there was quite a few recommendations that came out of that. And these are essentially what really are the challenges to help address the biggest challenges in attracting people to the sector. So, of course, there were things like strengthening investment into the sector and getting that certainty of what's happening in the future. And a lot has happened since then, which has been really great to see. And Alex has clearly been a part of making some of those things happen. But prioritizing inclusivity was a big thing that came out. Having this kind of really inclusive leadership, and a lot of organizations across the sector have adopted this, having leadership training programs, making sure that our leadership really embody all of the behaviors and culture that creates a successful sector. Another one which I actually initiated and I'm really proud of is Destination Nuclear, but it started off as improving employer branding and really getting the sector to talk about its credentials, what it can really offer to society and to help address climate change. So shortly after that, I set up Destination Nuclear, which grew at arms and legs and became a really huge program, and now with a dedicated team behind it. So the Next Gen NIC was really behind setting that up, and that's been hugely successful because the whole sector is really beginning to come together to work in one direction rather than in silos. And I think this has been one of the biggest challenges, actually. Can we work together for mutual benefit rather than spending £50,000 individually? If we can come together and spend 600,000 or £1 million, sending one message that can attract people through a conduit, through the Destination Nuclear portal for jobs, and actually start to bring people in. Now that's been handed over to Lynn Matthews and the Destination Nuclear team, and they've been doing a fantastic job of really starting to go further and bring in a wider variety of people from early careers to mid-career switchers. And as Alex said, this is a really big area where we're going to have experienced people close to retirement leaving in the next few years. It's already happening, to be honest. But how do we plug that gap? How do we make sure we get experienced hires into the sector that can hit the ground running, as well as building that pipeline at the really early stages, early careers, getting into schools and education and so on. So yeah, enhancing those career pathways, but really also making the sector an attractive sector to join. I think there's a lot for the sector to do to become a really successful sector and be able to deliver, but I don't think we are still at that point of communicating what we do well. I think there's still a lot of public perception issues around what we do. It's improved a hell of a lot in the last 10 years, which has been fantastic. But I think the argument for nuclear to be part of net zero was only really starting to be made after about 2015. It was there in rumours, I think, in early government between 2000 and 2010, but the sector hasn't really taken that message and run with it up until the last few years. So that kind of coming together, having a single voice for the great good of the sector has really started to come together. So those are the main points. I think the inclusionary aspects, making sure we've got that inclusive leadership, is really important to send that message throughout the sector. And one of the things we'll be working on in the future probably is around sustainability and all of the elements of sustainability, to both paint a picture of the reality of the sector where we are and show the good credentials that we have, but also use that to reflect back to the sector. How can we improve? What are the key areas that will help us get to this future of inclusive leadership and deliverability and performance, but also contributing to society? So there's probably a lot more I can say around skill shortages and training development pathways, but yeah, I'll pause there for now because I think Alex probably knows a lot more about that than me.
Thanks, Arun. I want to come to Alex now, because Aaron raised something there which we've heard throughout the week around public perception, and the way that the general public views different aspects of the whole net zero sustainability issue. And I can well appreciate that, there could be public perceptions which could be challenging around this nuclear sector. Is that something you're aware of, Alex, in your role, and is it something that you can do something about?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think Aaron pulled on some really important themes within the nuclear sector, and that public perception piece is a key one. My view is that the more that people know about nuclear, the more they're supportive, and the more that they are aware there are opportunities for them in the sector, the more they're interested in finding a role there. So I think that kind of communication piece is absolutely key, and I do think it is on us within the nuclear sector to really kind of champion what we are doing, both in terms of kind of like the big picture stuff, but also then actually the pathways it provides for individuals to come and join. And that's where I think the nuclear skills plan has a really key role to play. And I just want to kind of spend a few minutes giving a bit of an overview of what that is, particularly kind of leaning into some of the points that Aaron was mentioning, because actually, the Nuclear Skills Task Force, which was established back in 2023, was given a mandate by government, by industry, by kind of academia to go, okay, what is already happening within the nuclear sector where we collectively can kind of champion, can build on, and where are there opportunities for kind of new sustained action to really kind of help us grow that sector. And so through kind of over a course of a year, they developed what's called the National Nuclear Strategic Plan for Skills. I refer to it as the Nuclear Skills Plan because, National Nuclear Strategic Plan for Skills doesn't quite roll off the tongue, and is a bit tricky to say over and over again. But where the task force was really integral was actually looking at there is a need to act, getting the right organizations at the kind of the right scale represented to look at how do we drive action in response, and then developing a plan that can be and is being implemented. And this nuclear skills plan is effectively a landmark agreement to address the skills challenge collectively. And its ambition is to take the coordinated action necessary to avoid program delays, to avoid wage inflation, and ultimately kind of avoid the conflict between civil and defence employers for scarce resources. And in doing so, providing that sustained long-term action to add 40,000 jobs by 2030. And where I think this plan is really key is that organizations have committed from the very top to implementing this plan. And so leadership kind of at CEO level has really given weight behind it. So CEOs signed what's called the Nuclear Skills Charter, which commits these organizations to both delivering the plan, but also underlying behaviors to collaborate and kind of work more collectively, more effectively. And so this plan is about growing a workforce, but also I think changing the way we operate as a sector. And so organizations have committed funding to deliver the plan. They've brought individuals into the respective projects that are driving forward the plan, and they provided the experts to sit across the different governance boards that we have. Now, what we're trying to do is ensure that we have both that short-term delivery happening, kind of to demonstrate that this is a plan that is operational and can have an impact, but also ensuring that we have the structures in place to ensure the long-term implementation of this plan. So what's in the plan? We've got 15 projects across 4 themes for 10 years. Now, if I just briefly go through what those 4 themes are, and I kind of want to draw on a couple of the specific projects, particularly Destination Nuclear, just to kind of give you a bit of a flavour of what's included. But the 4 themes are collaborate, deepen, invest, and lead. And so collaboration is about how can we as a sector better collaborate? How can we stimulate more engagement between organizations, both at kind of a national level, but also at a regional level? And what we're trying to do here is go, okay, can we reduce those stovepipes that happen across the sector? So instead, what we're doing is actually maximizing the opportunities to work together, minimizing competition, and just enabling us to be a bit more efficient. Deepening, there's commitments to deepen our workforce. So how do we bring more people into the sector at different stages of their career? So how do we double apprentices? How do we double graduates? How do we quadruple our PhDs? The third theme is on invest. So, how do we ensure that we're not just attracting people into the sector, we're retaining them? So how do we ensure that they know that they can have long and rewarding careers here, whereas I kind of mentioned before, where they have that room to grow as they're growing our programs. And I think this is about recognizing that the plan can have a real impact on bringing people into the sector, but what it can also do is really accelerate accelerate our progress towards ensuring that we have a workforce that truly represents the societies from which we recruit. And I'll kind of come to a little bit later a bit about what we're doing on EDI, both through the plan, but also kind of how we're working with other organizations. And then the final theme is about leading. So this is about kind of drawing on something that Arun mentioned and the work that the council had really looked at of how can we build a network of leaders that drives forward those future programs. So in doing so, these four themes represent a package of attracting individuals into the sector and then retaining them. And this plan, we launched it back in May. It was published at a parliamentary reception, and so the months since have been about how do we implement it. So it's about how do we deliver it rather than delay. It's about showing that immediate delivery and also the long-term foundations which I mentioned. If I can just draw on maybe kind of two of the projects. The first is Destination Nuclear, which Arun has mentioned, and obviously kind of started this process off a few years ago. And Destination Nuclear is one of those 15 projects underneath the skills plan captured in our collaboration section. And I'm sure a lot of people on this call have heard about Destination Nuclear. I'm sure they've seen it from kind of its launch around COP time to the national and regional adverts we have at the minute. But as part of the plan, we have several phases. And what we've tried to use Destination Nuclear for is actually how can we promote the opportunities in the sector and how can we target campaigns against those critical shortages. And over a year, what we've really done through kind of Lynn and the team is actually move the dial on awareness of both kind of the variety of roles the sector offers, but also actually, we've seen, a real uptick in individuals that would consider a job move into the sector. Arun mentioned the careers portal. It's the first time, in nuclear that we've had this kind of national careers portal that captures, thousands of opportunities across the country, across the sector. It's something like 90,000 different positions have been viewed since the Destination Nuclear careers portal went live. And if I can just say on deepening the workforce, so one of the key drivers of this plan will be about doubling graduates, doubling apprentices. That takes long-term sustained commitment. We're on track in that first year to meet and exceed targets, but in doing so, also ensuring that we are putting in place the necessary structures to enable individuals to have a really long and rewarding careers. There's a lot I can talk about with the plan, and potentially there's opportunities to draw that out a little bit later. But I think what I want to emphasize is this is about attracting talent to the sector at different kind of through different pathways, but also retaining them, demonstrating that they can have long and rewarding careers here, ensuring that we have there's leadership schemes in place, retention schemes in place, and we're supporting individuals at every step of the way. So let me pause there. That's a little bit about the plan and what we're trying to do with it.
Thanks, Alex. I've just put a link in the chat to the plan so that people can actually see that. I just want to turn to Arun, because I was struck by something that you said when you were talking about the developing skills for this sector, will help us address the whole net zero agenda, because in doing that, we bring a raft of social benefits that go beyond it. And you mentioned improving decent work and economic growth, innovation, diversity, inclusion, often in communities that need investment in skills. How practically can we maximize the impact of that kind of output, that aim in those other areas by developing skills development by advancing skills development in the nuclear power sector?
Yeah, really good question. Just before I go into that, some of the stuff that Alex said, I think it just made me reflect a little bit, because for a number of years, there's been voluntary groups, people talking about skills as a big issue. The Next Gen NIC, we are actually a voluntary group, and this was a really big area for us that we thought, look, we really want to see something happening. And over the last few years, it's shifted away from volunteers trying to do stuff and the YGN having, this is the Nuclear Institute Young Generation Network, doing loads of activities for professional development and early careers. It's really transformed into a sector-wide funded stream of work with a real plan behind it. And I think that's just a fantastic achievement in itself, because it is a really tricky thing to do. So I think hats off to Alex and everybody else that has made that happen, because that really signals the intent for the future of where this is going. So in terms of, directly your question, Andy, on that wider value, over the past few years, I've really started to understand a bit more, what do we mean by value? We talk about value for money a lot. Often that's confused with lowest cost. But looking at, for example, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that's real value to me. You can address multiple of those goals in different ways. And so clean energy is one of those goals. Climate action is another goal, which we're all really kind of acutely aware of. And contributing to those will help our sustainable development, our future. It will mitigate the future risks we face. But there's also a lot of other goals in there. Gender equality is one, SDG 5, reducing inequalities, in economic inequality that we see around a lot of the communities that nuclear is really well positioned to take advantage of and help improve. So that is in itself, if we can help reduce those inequalities, a huge aspect of value that we can provide. Quality education in itself is one of the sustainable development goals. Just by improving levels of education, skills development is part of SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth. There's all of these pieces of the puzzle that make up what societal value is. And the more we can be granular about what are we going after, what are we uniquely positioned as a sector to help contribute to, the clearer it will become and the more of an impact we'll be able to have. And sometimes it's also about minimizing the negative impacts. There's a lot of waste produced, and there's a lot of work that goes in the sector to minimize waste and disposal and safe management of wastes. That is a huge area that we are kind of minimizing the risk to people and public and the environment. So these are all facets of value, and I think by identifying those, really honing in on them and contributing to these goals at a macro level, will help kind of the wider sustainability agenda. And I think one of the things that we forget is all of these are interconnected. None of them happen in silos. You contribute to skills, that helps us deliver clean energy, that helps reduce income inequality, and it's figuring out that system of systems and how all of these things interact with one another, which is how I think we can maximize that longer term view.
Thanks, Aaron. I just want to come back again on some of the the work that you're doing in the Next Generation Nuclear Industry Council. I mean, from your perspective, how are you making a difference within the sector? I mean, obviously you're the shadow board of the Nuclear Industry Council. Are your members being listened to? How do you avoid? And I'm not saying in any way you are this, because I've done some reading up on what you're doing in it. You see them doing quite a lot in the group. But how do you avoid the dangers of some of these groups that get set up in the industry of just becoming, yes, we've got this group, but there's no output from it? How are you ensuring that you're being listened to, and that your ideas and thoughts get a wider audience?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because I think there are a lot of end groups in the sector, as they've been coined before. There's a group for everything you could probably find. One of my priorities is to really work with a lot of the other voluntary groups. So it's part of the Nuclear Skills Delivery Board, which I think is involved with the full acronym, NNSPG. I've probably got it wrong, but the Nuclear Skills Plan there. We've got a voluntary group seat on part of that board, and that kind of voice helps to represent all of the voluntary groups, whether it's the Nuclear Institute's Young Generation Network, the Next Gen Nuclear Industry Council, Women in Nuclear, Race Equality in Nuclear. There are a lot of these groups, and I think for me it's really important that we have a granular and coordinated voice in what we do and what we say. A lot of this is about making sure the youth voice is heard in the future of the sector. At the end of the day, this is the sector that we'll all be working in and leading in the future. And so what can we do now to help shape that, or even nudge it in the way that we'd like to kind of see a future? And so we've met with Minister Hunt recently to kind of understand more of his priorities and share ours, and we'll hopefully be meeting him again in the new year to kind of continue that relationship and actually help make sure we kind of go after those areas of mutual benefit, one of which skills is a huge one, but there's also tons of other areas. So carbon management this is just one example, but carbon management in the actual design and construction and the way we do things can help reach our net zero goals, but also help us reduce costs at the upfront stages and reduce complexity of what we're doing. There's a lot of these areas and examples of, if we can focus at the earliest stages, we can reduce cost, reduce risk, improve deliverability of what we're doing, and actually improve the investment opportunities as well for pension funds and other investment companies. So there's a lot of areas of mutual benefit, and that is one of our focuses of the next 12 months, coordinating ourselves amongst all the voluntary groups, having one voice in, and both reflecting out of the sector what we are, and also using that to help improve the sector on the inside.
Thanks, Aaron. Just going back to Alex, thinking about the challenges, the skills challenges around nuclear. How do you? And I'm not sure how big an issue this is, because in my mind the sector seems to be quite kind of cutting edge and go ahead. But how are you going about? How does the sector go about retaining people? You know, in the sector, bearing in mind that, and I was just having a quick flick through the report that you mentioned, or the strategic plan for skills, which basically states that you're going to need to double the levels of recruitment going forward. But what are you doing about retention? Is there a need for retention? Is it a stronger need as some of the other sectors in the whole net zero area, and what's specifically being done to strengthen that?
Thanks, Andy. So look, retention is integral, and if we are to build a workforce that is motivated, it is inspired and able to deliver our nuclear ambition, then retention is going to be absolutely key. And it's as important as recruitment. And if we don't retain, then it will be to the detriment of the nuclear sector. And so a big part of the nuclear skills plan is about, how do we create that stronger sense of a nuclear community, that sense of belonging. And that's why we have dedicated strands of activity on deepening collaboration, but also retaining our workforce through bespoke leadership schemes. So Aaron mentioned kind of earlier in one of his interventions about actually how do you equip individuals to become future leaders in the sector? Well, through the nuclear skills plan, 2 of our projects are focused on that. So it's about kind of creating opportunities for individuals at different stages of their career to really grow, to really develop. We also have retention schemes. So one of the projects focused in the plan is on what's called interchange. And what we've done through this is establish, a nationwide kind of mobility hub where industry organizations across the sector can sign up to. And what that enables them to do is provide kind of opportunities for individuals to kind of actually go on like short-term secondments or loans. And in doing so, how can we get better at retaining knowledge transfer? How can we get better at creating mobility opportunities for individuals across the country? And how can we create kind of a more inclusive workforce, kind of, because you're looking at where we can focus on increasing mobility. And through this work as well, when we think about attraction, so doubling the apprentices and doubling the graduates, we have to ensure that we've got the necessary structures in place to support those individuals. So do they have supportive and trained managers? Do they have L&D pathways? Do they have networking and progression opportunities? So we need to ensure that we know individuals are kind of finding their work and their time here rewarding, and they have the support to do that. And so, we're also looking at, how do you standardize career paths? How do you create kind of role descriptions and associated curriculum and qualifications that enable kind of more movement, ensure that we are taking each other, we're kind of giving those opportunities across the sector. In the plan, we also have a kind of a dedicated EDI project lead who is looking at both, how can we ensure that EDI is central to each of the individual projects. So actually, when we're thinking about the specific projects and activities, EDI being central, but also looking at where we can identify where the sector has the most significant challenges, where we can then leverage existing solutions, including kind of what Arun has mentioned earlier, but also where we can develop targeted actions to improve this position. So we have that as kind of a dedicated project lead, and we have dedicated time at our governance board to focus on this. And Arun mentioned the Nuclear Skills Delivery Board, kind of one of the governance mechanisms for delivering the plan. Absolutely, that doesn't just include the organisations that are responsible for delivering the plan. It enables us to kind of reach more broadly out to the sector to ensure that we're not duplicating existing work, that we're building on the experience, the expertise that others have, and make it so that this plan represents the collective action of the sector operating as one. We work closely with the Women in Nuclear team as well, particularly in anticipation of the global conference that the UK is hosting next year. And I think it's all about, can we as a sector go, okay, there is something that needs a response. Can we get organisations together to develop a response that brings in the right expertise, the right experience from across the sector, has then momentum behind it to deliver, which has kind of CEO backing, which has funding behind it, which has the project lead, which has teams, and kind of get that momentum going. So what you're trying to do is build it all as a sector whole response to something that needs that sector whole response. So yeah, that's kind of been really central to what we're doing. And I think a key thread is we can't just be focused on attracting new talent to the sector, because if we don't retain them, then that'll be to the detriment of what we're doing. So yeah, a lot of focus on retention throughout the skills plan.
Kind of related to retention is this issue of transferable skills and getting people who maybe weren't working in the sector to come into the sector. I don't know what Arun thinks about that. How, because obviously that wouldn't necessarily be, well, or it might be, related to younger people, because obviously they're kind of starting off on their career. But what's your view about how this sector can actually bring in people with skills that have maybe been used in other sectors, but those other sectors are no longer, either viable or they're not being invested in as much? Is there much crossover and new people coming in from that kind of direction?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people that I talk to in the nuclear sector have accidentally fallen into the sector. There's a lot of people that ended up there that weren't necessarily planning to be there. But once they've got there, they've absolutely loved it, and that they're so grateful to be in the sector. I think there's so many transferable skills. We often talk about STEM subjects and having engineers and scientists, but there's so many other professions that the nuclear sector needs, from legal to HR to creative industries and so on. There's a lot of roles to fill, and I just had a quick look on the Destination Nuclear website. There's over 1,000 roles live right now. So there's a huge need, and I think there's something for everyone, no matter which sector you're in. I go for walks with my friends, and I'm always trying to convince them to go have a look at the Destination Nuclear portal and get them in. And they work in the arts and media and creative industries, and there's tons of roles for that kind of thing as well. So absolutely, I think there is really something for everyone. And then also in terms of kind of that retention, the nuclear sector does offer a lot of benefits just through the nature of the type of work we do and the locations that we're in. Again, I think there's something for everyone. If you want to work in a city and do something design related, there'll be opportunities. If you want to live out in West Cumbria and go hiking and enjoy the lakes, there's lots of opportunities there. There's a lot of international opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities for growth as well, and career development pathways. So yeah, there's such a variety of things to do, and throughout the sector that I think there's opportunities for everyone. I think there's another question as well around what nuclear can do for skills, and going back to that value question, yes, nuclear is there to help develop and get to net zero and provide energy security and national security, but also it goes the other way as well. By developing skills, that in itself is such a valuable thing for society that we should give that the onus that it requires as well. So yes, we're doing skills to help achieve these wider goals, but also developing skills in itself is a valuable kind of achievement and a noble thing to aim for. So I don't think that should be forgotten.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. Again, I'm struck by the plan that Alex spoke about. I mean, I must admit, of all these things that I've read, um, uh, big kudos for its kind of there's a clear logic through the plan in terms of what's required, and I was struck by the the transferable skills stuff as well, and about how there was various initiatives and programs in place to to basically get people up to speed. Obviously, that's involved quite a lot of collaboration work with, frankly, organisations that compete with each other in some cases. I mean, how did you achieve that? How did that come come about? Uh, were there challenges in that, or was it just the right time, the right issue, and those organisations were happy to come together?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So look, if I could say, is there one key word throughout the nuclear skills plan, it would be collaboration. And I think there's been a genuine recognition over the past year that if we had continued down a path of thinking through what are the skills needed for specific projects, we wouldn't have grown the overall pipeline of skilled workers in the sector. And what that would have meant is, individual organizations would then be competing with one another for that same talent, that same resource. Whereas if we can look at it collectively and go, okay, what can we put in place to grow the overall pipeline, making sure that we can have that kind of collective and sustained commitment behind it, it is for the benefit of the sector as a whole. And I think what we're trying to do with this work as well is, almost kind of move away from a mentality of looking at specific programs and go, okay, what does the nuclear sector need? So actually, if individuals work on a submarine program for X amount of years and then move across to a decommissioning project, they are being retained in the nuclear sector, but in doing so, they are helping kind of retain knowledge within the sector, bring their skills and experience to different programs for the benefit of all. So I think it's kind of, thinking about it like that. And that is something that the sector has really bought into, because if we can show there is an overall growth in that pipeline, it benefits all programs. And if I may, just on the skills specifically, I think one thing I have been struck by is, a perception that, nuclear roles are just those specialist roles. When you kind of, people that maybe have not worked in nuclear before, if they think of nuclear, they think of specialist roles. And I think where destination nuclear has been so important is actually demonstrating to a national audience that yes, there are technical specialist roles and there's a need to grow there, but there is also a huge need to grow those kind of transferable skills. Things like welding, project managers, they have a role to play in delivering our nuclear program. There are pathways for those individuals here, and just really bringing that to a national audience has been to our benefit, and it's something that we want to see continue for the years to come, because the nuclear program will grow, these roles will grow, and I hope individuals looking at it think, okay, this means there is an opportunity for me to have that long and rewarding career.
Thanks, Alex. Final question to both of you. I'm going to start this one with Arun, and it's an opportunity succinctly and briefly to effectively promote this sector. People out there watching, thinking about it, never really thought about diving in. Why should they basically consider a career in this particular sector, and what benefits are they likely to get from it? Very briefly, Arun.
For me, it's always coming down to purpose. There's a really strong sense of purpose in this sector. You're going to address global challenges, you're going to contribute to society, and you're going to be able to do that in a sector that's really welcoming, inclusive, and has a great future ahead of it. So, yeah, plenty there to unpack.
Thanks very much, Alex.
You will be at the heart of something that will deliver our energy security, maintain our national security, and also enable us to reach net zero. And I would just say, if you're looking at nuclear thinking there might not be a role for you, I'd encourage you to take a look, and I'm sure you will find something that will build on your skills, your experiences, and will enable you to have that long and rewarding career here in nuclear. Thank you.
Thanks very much. A pair of excellent advocates for the sector. And that skills plan, again, I can recommend people read it. 7 pages as well, which almost guarantees that it'll be read, because far too many reports are too long and people don't read them. But that one, and well illustrated as well, I might add. So, thanks very much indeed for your contributions to this final session of Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week. And that concludes this third and final day of the week. I hope that everybody has learned something from our discussions and deliberations over the past 3 days, and hopefully been inspired as well and enlightened by our excellent speakers from a sector that, frankly, will play a crucial role in the energy economy's drive towards net zero and a more sustainable world. Thanks again to Arun and Alex for their contributions in this session. I'd like to say again a big thank you to all our sponsors, Cundall, Epicam and Vattenfall Heat UK, for their support for the week. We couldn't do this without you. And massive thanks also to all of our speakers throughout the past 3 days for giving so generously of their time and for sharing their expertise. And I hope people who've attended have learned a thing or two from that as well. And last but definitely not least, thank you to all of our attendees for giving us an audience to talk to, because without you, we really don't have an event. So that's much appreciated as well. I've been Andy Walker, and I hope to see you again at another of our events very, very soon. But for now, it's goodbye from me and goodbye from everybody involved in Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week 2024. Thanks for listening and see you soon.